Well, Alan, I mean, let's start informally. You've never been to this show before, or?
No.
No? Okay. And you have no relation, there's no hidden kind of Parsons people. Who is the original Parsons of Parsons Audio?
Apparently it's a guy called Mark Parsons, who is not here. No.
He's not here. Oh, well, there we go. There we go. Mark Parsons. And the company's been going for many years. There we go. So, for Alan, his career began at this place. How old were you, Alan, when you first walked up these steps?
19.
19. And how did you get the job?
Well, soon after leaving school at 16, I was basically a high school dropout, although I went to a very salubrious public, what is known as a public school in the UK, which means, to all intents and purposes, a private school to anyone else. But I'd been working for EMI, which is the parent company, of course, of Abbey Road Studios at the time. And I got some experience with EMI's tape machines, more as a maintenance engineer, a bit of a white coat job, really. And also a little bit of experience doing research work on vinyl record surfaces, trying to get the noise and clickety-click down from vinyl. And I simply wrote a letter soon after hearing Sgt. Pepper in the department I was working at. It was called Tape Records, which was a department that was making reel-to-reel copies of EMI's product at that time on a little 3-inch plastic spool in mono, 2 sides. He turned it over at the halfway point, just like vinyl. And I just wrote to the manager, said, please can I visit the studios and talk about the possibility of employment? And they granted me an interview. 2 weeks later, I was there. So literally working my first 2 weeks in the tape library, which was extremely influential. It taught me that you must give every detail about the recording you're working with. You can never have too much information because so many tapes get misfiled or lost or whatever. So,
what were they working on at that time? Was it 8-track, 4-track still, or?
8-track had just literally arrived in the previous
have these
few months.
Interesting objects behind you. I don't know if you recognize any of them, but
I don't recognize those machines at all. But does anybody know what machines those are?
Oh,
They look like maybe custom, built by some dude, No, I don't recognize them at all. We always used Studio machines at Abbey Road. There was the J37 4-track. I think you have that in your next. That was the normal machine that most sessions took place on, and these 5 knobs here actually controlled the mix into the headphones for the musicians. So it was off the record head. So that was a rather nice thing that as a button pusher, or as we were called, button pushers, in the early days of my stint at Abbey Road. It was nice that you were in a way in control of what the performers were actually hearing in the headphones. And really very, very simple machine. Those are the record ready buttons for the 4 tracks, as I remember. And then simply, play, rewind, fast forward, stop and record, just like a home machine. It's very. But the thing that I learnt for the first time on the J37 was the idea of a punch-in, or a drop-in, as we call it in the UK. Going into play and then into record. And if you screwed that up, you were in big trouble, because it's gone forever.
Undo.
No undo, yeah. So if you dropped in at the wrong moment, you were history.
Did you?
I think I might have erased a half a bass note on the Abbey Road album, but I think it got edited out, so no one actually noticed. It was on the end song, which was just a series of edits anyway, with a very repetitive bass line. So, but there was another occasion where I didn't so much press the wrong button, but I failed to. The producer asked me to wind back the tape to a previous take for playback, so I played it. And he said, "No, I prefer the later take." Phone rings, I go, and they say, "Ready to record the next title." Off I go into record, erasing the good take of the next performance. Anyway, I sheepishly went up to the engineer, Peter Bown, and said, "I'm afraid we're recording over the good take of the last title." And apparently I was very white-faced. And he then leaned over to the producer, Norman Newell, to say, we're inadvertently wiping the good take of the last tune. And he was actually very gracious. He said, "Well, it's okay, we'll record it again." And they recorded it again, and they were much happier with it than they had been with either of the previous takes. So my job was saved, and...
But for that, Alan might not be standing here today.
Right. Could have been fired that day, yeah.
It could have been Alan who... On Beatle records, Alan, it must have been a real feat of math and method to work out what to record on which track when. Whose job was that?
Oh, I think it was very much combination of producer and engineer. So between George Martin and Jeff Emmerich would have been...
So they'd work out the order of when to record.
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult on 4 tracks, of course. Like I said, the Abbey Road sessions were on 8-track, and Let It Be was also on 8-track. But as we all know, believe it or not, Sgt. Pepper was recorded on 4-track. I mean, a few generations going from one 4-track to another 4-track to another 4-track. And it's incredible the quality that they still managed to save through all those transfers. But yeah, it was a process of decision making. You had to make decisions back then, you know, to get the balance between the bass and drums, for example, which would probably end up on 1 track. You know, how the stereo picture was going to be formulated, whether it was going to be, you know, all vocals in the center, or whether they were going to spread out on one side. You can tell actually that it was only 4 tracks on Pepper, because a lot of the vocals do end up on one side of the stereo. But you know, that's part of the effect, I think. But it was conceived as a mono album. Jeff Emmerich would have, were he still here today, sadly he died a month ago. If he was here today, he was saying that don't listen to the stereo of Sgt. Pepper, because it was a mono album designed to be mono. So, and there's all these new reissues and stuff which he totally despises, or despised, should I say. But there we are.
How much importance did Abbey Road itself place on developing technology? Were there kind of policies or diktats regarding how to implement them as each generation was developed?
I don't think there were any actual orders given on how to
I know they had orders about mics and stuff.
There was one order from the top management at Abbey Road: "Thou shalt not use a ribbon mic on kick drum," which was a reasonable thing to have an edict for. But no, I mean it was clear from Abbey Road Pepper onwards that more tracks were needed. So in a way, the Beatles led the industry into developing 16-track, then 24-track, then ultimately, as we are now, unlimited. So
you must have spent a lot of time looking at that view there.
oh, right.
This is when you did a masterclass for the Abbey Road Institute, but this is number 2 at Abbey Road. What was a typical day at Abbey Road number 2 like working with the Beatles? I mean, what would you be doing as an assistant engineer?
Sadly, during the Abbey Road album time, the tape-op was behind a glass in another room, looking into the control room, so facing the engineer and producer and artist. And I could not see into the studio. So it was a little bit of a isolated experience. But everybody sort of saw through that weakness in the end, and they rebuilt the control room so that the tape-op could be more a part of the session.
But that must have been pretty hairy if you're going in to record at a very important moment and you can't see anybody.
Yes, it's true. It was more difficult. And another difficulty was we recorded Abbey Road on a 3M 8-track machine, which had this interesting capstan in between the record head and the replay head. So it took about a full half second to get from, which is an eternity in audio, half a second. It took that long for the tape to get from the record head to the replay head. The band, of course, is listening to the record head, and it was Abbey Road policy at the time, and continues to be if working with analog tape, that you always listen on line out, in other words, off tape. So as the tape op, I would have to anticipate what was actually coming out of the speakers by that half second, if it was a tight punch in. So that got nerve-wracking from time to time. And then sometimes they would, the musicians would say, "Hold it," and you'd stop. And then the producer would say, "Why did you stop?" "Well, he said hold it." But they hadn't heard it because it wouldn't have happened for another half second. So there it is.
Yes, the new generation has no idea how recording started. So tell us how you ended up here, Alan. I think that is you in the sporting orange shirt there.
That is
right?
me, yeah. Yeah, I made the mistake of being behind that camera, so therefore never featured in the movie very much. So, in fact, not at all. But it was a great day. I was literally just there to make sure that all the mics worked and nothing broke down.
And by this time, were you officially an engineer, not a tape op?
Oh, no, I was very much tape op still.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, this was, I'd only been at Abbey Road, I started in October. This was January, I believe, 69. And yeah, very much a junior person, but working under, for the first time, working under a freelance engineer, which was Glyn Johns. And I remember somebody telling me, you know what, Glyn Johns gets £5 an hour. I went, oh my God, that's so much money. And it was a lot of money back then.
So how long did it take in those days to go from a tape op to a fully fledged engineer? And how did they assess that you were ready?
It was kind of a gradual process. I mean, I would be let loose. The first time I was actually let loose on the console was for Holly's single. I'd done a couple of albums with them as an assistant, and yeah, I did a single which was a small hit. It was called Gasoline Alley Bread, and I continued to work with them in later years as their engineer. Worked on. I engineered The Air That I Breathe, which was one of their biggest hits, and one I'm very proud of. The Hollies, I mean, they were always there at Abbey Road and always on time, wonderful to work with, and worked with some of the, if they needed a session man, they would bring in this piano player called Reginald Dwight. Or Reggie, and he played on a couple of their tracks, notably He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother. And not a lot of people know that Elton John was on Holly's records, but there we go.